Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're going to take an early look at the upcoming Star Wars Jedi Survivor and see how it compares both visually and from a gameplay perspective to the previous entry to the series, Fallen Order. For this analysis, both games are being played on the PC, with the graphics settings set to the highest available options at a native 4K resolution. Dynamic resolution and scaling options have been disabled as well, along with motion blur, film grain, and chromatic aberration, ensuring the cleanest possible image captures for comparison. Also, please be aware that the footage that I've captured here of Jedi Survivor is from the initial review build of the game, and is subject to change with day one patches. So, while I will point out various technical issues regarding performance and stability, these have been acknowledged by the developers at Respawn, and are scheduled to be addressed with those patches. Alright, so let's kick this comparison off by first taking a look at some of the characters, starting with our lead protagonist, Cal Kestis. Now, no doubt one of the first things you're going to notice here is that Cal himself has grown up a bit since the events of the last game, with a light beard, groomed hair, and slightly more bulk to his figure, especially around his shoulders, arms, and his overall facial structure. Cal's also ditched his old scrapper outfit as well, and begins his new adventure wearing something more reminiscent of a certain smuggler, with a padded leather vest over a long-sleeve white shirt, brown trousers, and an angled holster to hold his lightsaber. Though this is only the default outfit, Jedi Survivor also benefits from a greatly expanded customization system for Cal, with the ability to mix and match different clothing options found throughout the galaxy to suit your preferred style. Fallen Order did have at least some customization options, mainly different overlaying ponchos and different color configurations for them, but the sequel gives players a lot more freedom in this area. Players can even customize Cal's hair this time around. It can go from the classic clean-shaven look to having a full beard or handlebar mustache, along with a variety of different hairstyles. As for the actual quality and complexity of the model itself, there's no question that what we're seeing in Jedi Survivor is much more technically advanced than the models in the previous game. Poly counts appear to have been bumped up a good amount, and texture maps for the characters' clothing and skin is now purpose-built for 4K displays, allowing them to hold up extremely well under close scrutiny. In the right light, you can even see a fair amount of peach fuzz baked into the skin textures, which is a really nice touch. BD1 has, unsurprisingly, not seen any sort of growth spurt between the events of these two games, and looks practically identical to his original design, with the same paint scheme, angled scope, lens, and even the same exposed wires on the inside of either leg. But, just like with Cal, the textures used and material properties of BD's metal bits are a bit of a step up, and even reflect ambient light more naturally. Players can once again customize BD1's appearance, but are now given more control over individual pieces just like everything else, allowing players to swap between different legs, antenna, scopes, body kits, color schemes, and materials to really make this little companion their own. This same workshop menu is also shared with the game's lightsaber customization, that, like everything else, has been expanded considerably, with dozens of different swappable piece designs, materials, colors, and even an option to determine the polish of the hilt overall. The original game has lightsaber and BD1 customization too, but BD1 is limited to full skin conversions, and lightsaber customization is not nearly as robust. Jedi Survivor sees several familiar faces return too, including the lovable Latero pilot Grease Dritus, the mysterious Dathomirian Night Sister Marin, and the former Jedi Knight Seer, all of whom have received a major makeover of their own, with new outfits, haircuts, and evolved personalities to demonstrate how much things have changed since the last game. Along with the returning cast, Jedi Survivor also introduces players to several brand new characters, who all feel just as well developed and expansive as those characters from Fallen Order, building on the sub-series' lore while also keeping the experience feeling new and fresh. Enemies have seen some major improvements as well, mainly in regards to the quality and complexity of things like stormtrooper armor and helmets, with an incredible level of detail that most players probably would never even notice. What's more, Jedi Survivor really bulks up the amount of enemy variety found throughout the game, mixing in the classic stormtroopers and wild animals from before, with an entirely new faction of raiders that have hijacked a legion of old Trade Federation droids to help terrorize one of the game's larger playable spaces. While I'm not necessarily the biggest prequels fan, seeing all these droids return was a real treat. They add a real nice element to the overall formula, both in how they are handled in combat and the way they inject their classic cheesy charm into the game's atmosphere. You'll often hear the battle droids say ridiculous things as you fling them off cliffs, which, in the context of a video game like this one, works extremely well. What's more, these enemies also play to the game's graphical strengths as well, as the reflective metal of the super battle droids looks incredible when reflecting things like the player's lightsaber, and the sparks that emit as players tear them apart. Collectively, Jedi Survivor's character models are miles ahead of what's on offer in Fallen Order, which is impressive considering the enemy designs in the old game still hold up great today. Next up, we have the environments. In Fallen Order, players are given the chance to explore several different worlds within the Star Wars universe, each with their own unique visual aesthetic and style. Some of these areas are straight linear sequences, with players fighting through swarms of stormtroopers or wildlife in between important story beats. But most of the game takes place on these much larger, semi-open world environments, built with a sort of Metroidvania mindset. This includes the grassy canyons of Bogano, the mountainous ruins on Zepho, the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk, and the dark and foreboding Dathomir. Most of the play area is built around fairly straightforward paths, with dozens of platforming obstacles separating out arenas to fight different groups of enemies. Though sometimes these paths are blocked by an unusual obstacle that requires a specific gadget, usually unlocked later in the game's story. Jedi Survivor builds on these exact concepts, using some planets as story-driven linear set pieces, while bulking up the base of the game with larger Metroidvania-style locations. But there are a few subtle changes to the design style that set it apart. For one, those long slides found all throughout Fallen Order are not nearly as prevalent this time around. There's instead a lot more wall running and wall jumping, mixed in with ropes, zip lines, and more varied climbable surfaces. The sliding is still in the game, but it's been toned down quite a bit. More importantly though, a large chunk of Jedi Survivor actually takes place on a single planet called Kobo, that serves as a sort of central hub world. This world is misleadingly large, so large that I found myself spending full days exploring it, using the game's holomap to chart out available areas and discover new secrets. The planet itself has a sort of arid desert look to it, with lots of dry rocky surfaces, sand, and vegetation. In the center, there's a small town that becomes a sort of base of operations for Cal and his friends. And as the player progresses further, this town will gradually spring to life with more NPCs, storefronts, and other activities to discover. There's even a little rooftop garden for growing seeds, building upon the concept from Fallen Order where players would find seeds for Grease and observe them growing inside the Mantis ship. For players that did prefer the variety and smaller levels in the original game, Survivor does still feature plenty of traditional planets to explore too, which can be accessed throughout the course of normal story progression by boarding the Mantis at a nearby hangar. Though it's certainly worth exploring Kobo now and again, as there's lots of cool secrets to uncover in the surrounding cliffsides. As for the actual quality of these environments, things like level geometry, asset complexity, and texture resolution are all significantly improved with this latest entry. Vegetation in particular is remarkably dense now, and can often be fully interacted with using the lightsaber. That's not to say the original game's environments were necessarily bad looking though. Even today, the various planets in Fallen Order are gorgeously detailed, and even feature dynamic grass that will react to Cal's movement, a feature that, while still present in Survivor, isn't quite as pronounced. But many of these rocky surfaces and finer details like the many objects within the interior of the Mantis have been given a much needed upgrade, and add slightly more character to the world as a result. Lighting is another area that's been improved a decent amount in the sequel. Both games make liberal use of baked lighting effects to achieve their look. However, the quality of things like bounce lighting in and around the caves of Kobo is a significant improvement over the directional lighting used throughout Fallen Order. And reflective materials like water and metal also incorporate much better screen space reflections, avoiding the often distracting artifacting found all throughout the previous game. Jedi Survivor on the PC also makes use of ray tracing features as well, which seems to be used to enhance the quality of reflections throughout the game. Glass surfaces like certain floors and windows will reflect large environmental assets. However, the reflected image doesn't include the higher fidelity texture layers or miscellaneous effects like smoke, sparks, or fire. What's more, the ray tracing in this build of the game that I was able to play is brutally demanding, dropping my performance down to averages in the 40 and 50 FPS range, with an RTX 4090. With ray tracing disabled, the FPS jumps back to a more acceptable average, though those surfaces that rely on ray tracing for their reflective properties don't seem to have any alternatives like screen space reflections or cube maps, making certain environments feel extremely dull by comparison. But even with the ray tracing disabled, the lighting in Survivor is still improved across the board over its predecessor, and does a great job of creating a believable atmosphere. Shadows have been improved a little bit too, but the shadows in the original game were already fairly decent. Most of the playable spaces are composed of static baked shadowing, thanks to the nature of the lighting design. Though both per object and dynamic shadows are also used to enhance the appearance of character shadows, vegetation, and other movable assets. This technique is carried over into Survivor as well. However, because of the increased scale of these newer environments, the shadow render distance is more apparent, which can result in some noticeable shadow pop-in when traveling in these bigger spaces. It's not terribly distracting, but it's certainly a benefit of using smaller contained spaces like those in Fallen Order. Character shadow casting hasn't necessarily been improved that much, as we still get that same ugly dithering along the edges, but it's serviceable, and certain spotlights still cast nice and clean shadows now and again. Next, we have our various miscellaneous effects like smoke, fire, water, and general physics. Here we have another nice boost to quality, as there are far more particles and physics-based effects on screen in most instances. Sparks from strikes with a lightsaber are particularly noteworthy, and really shine when battling legions of robotic battle droids. The fire and water rendering are okay, but not particularly amazing, which is a bit of a shame as there's plenty of opportunities throughout that would have been great showcases for these types of effects. One of the more impressive effects I noticed throughout my playthrough was the destructibility of the world's smaller objects. Practically every plant can be cut down using the player's lightsaber, and will even break apart relative to the type of swing used. This same effect was featured in Fallen Order as well, but because there's much more variety in plant life and other dynamic objects, this feature really stands out in Survivor. Another nice change that I feel is worth mentioning is the removal of that annoying blur effect that surrounded Cal whenever performing wall runs and climbs, something that, even with motion blur disabled, still persisted in the original game and always felt unnecessary. Moving on, let's take a look at some of the biggest changes that have been made to the gameplay design, starting with the general player traversal and control. In Fallen Order, players spend a lot of time running, jumping, and dashing across walls using a combination of unlocked gadgets and force-based abilities. Most of these core abilities are available right from the get-go in Survivor, maintaining the continuity of the narrative. The developers have tried to streamline these actions more, removing unnecessary button presses for climbing up on grates and vines. Wall running also no longer requires a button hold either, and can be strung together more easily with Jedi flips to climb up higher, or even bounce from wall to wall straight upwards. Alongside these changes, Survivor also introduces new tools like the Ascension Cable, that can be used to instantly zip to defined points. These can then be strung together with the traditional wall runs and flips to make for more interesting platforming challenges. To help traverse the larger environments, players can even ride around on some of the wildlife, and will sometimes need to utilize them for obstacles, in what can only be described as a move straight out of Super Mario World. Survivor also introduces new companion mechanics to play around with. These are typically only available at certain points in the story, and often involve pressing the right bumper whenever the game tells you to proceed further. But it does at least make those characters feel more involved in the traversal, and provides an opportunity to expand dialogue during the animations. These companions are much more helpful when it comes to the combat, as they each have their own specific attacks that can be used to temporarily stun enemies, making them susceptible to some easy strikes. Speaking of combat, Survivor also makes a few changes to how the iconic lightsaber is handled. In Fallen Order, players begin the game with a standard blue lightsaber, but later they're given an opportunity to craft their own double-sided blade that can even be separated into a dual blade configuration for a unique special move. To expand on this concept, Survivor introduces specific stances to the game that can be toggled using the D-pad. This includes the traditional single blade, the double-sided blade, the dual wield, and even a new blaster stance that combines a single blade with a blaster sidearm. The catch is that only 2 of these stances can be equipped at any one time, so players will need to swap them out at meditation points to choose the right stance to fit the circumstances. Combat moves have also been expanded slightly, with more animations and flashy new finishers, complete with the highly requested limb dismemberment. The force powers function about the same as before, with force push, pull, and carefully timed parries capable of deflecting blaster fire, though the old slow motion trick from Fallen Order has been delegated to a new double stick press special attack that slows every enemy at once, only freeing them after they've been struck. Personally, I think I preferred the way the old slow motion attack worked, as it allowed you to do cool things like stop a blaster shot in mid-air and then throw an enemy into it. Though, this new ability does come in handy in tough fights at least. Players also have the option to use the force to confuse enemy combatants now, which will temporarily turn them into allies and pit them against each other. Though, I didn't find myself using this particular ability all too often. Finally, let's wrap up with a quick sound comparison. Which of these 2 games do you feel has the better audio quality and design?
I think you should just give up. Give up! Shooting at the target! I got
And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Star Wars Jedi Survivor is a much bigger and more ambitious game than its predecessor. Visually, there's been some great improvements, with superior model renders, environments, lighting, and effects. But from a gameplay perspective, this game takes everything that worked before and builds on it significantly, keeping the action and story focused, while also encouraging exploration by means of fun cosmetics and other unlockable content. However, in its current state, I will say that the PC version seems to be a bit unstable. As you've probably already noticed from the footage that I've captured, the performance in many of these larger areas, especially on Kobo, performed well below 60 FPS when ray tracing was enabled. What's more, features like FSR don't appear to be working at the moment, with nearly identical performance numbers despite dropping the quality of the rendering considerably. Also encountered an awful audio bug during cutscenes that caused voice tracks to cut out and repeat over top of each other, to the point of ruining each scene. By the time I reached the third planet, the game had even started to crash repeatedly, almost to the point of halting my progress, though disabling the ray tracing seemed to help. I've since reported all these issues to EA and Respawn, who've confirmed that these issues are already being investigated and are even set to be patched either today or Friday, though it's certainly something to be aware of if you're planning to buy this on the PC. On a lighter note, I was also given the opportunity to try this game on the PS5, and I'm happy to report that it runs almost perfectly on the console. Visual options available in the version that I played include a locked 4K quality mode at 30 FPS, and a 1440p performance mode that ran at a mostly solid 60 FPS. The average FPS did drop a little bit in those open areas, but it wasn't nearly as noticeable as it was on the PC, and the experience was much smoother as a result. Outside of those technical issues though, Jedi Survivor is a fantastic follow-up to an already great Star Wars game, and I'm really looking forward to jumping back in to play some more. But what do you guys think? Are you looking forward to Jedi Survivor? Or do you prefer Fallen Order? Let me know in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this posted every week.